Welcome to Worth It. I'm your host, Lonnie Buse, on this live interview and training network, HYPNO 24/7. So today, I would love to introduce to you my guest, Mark Sewell. Mark is an unconscious coach, hypnotist, and mindscaper based in Springfield, Missouri. He has spent years studying the brain and how its inner workings can help bring about change quickly. Whether it's weight management, smoking cessation, overcoming phobias and fears, stress management, or more, he uses the power of hypnosis, NLP, timelines, EFT, mindscaping, and other coaching tools to bring about the desired changes rapidly. Welcome to Worth It, Mark. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Lonnie?
Good, good, good. I just want to thank you for coming on my show today. And I'm just going to have a fun talk. I'm going to loosely talk
Sure.
about this.
We'll have fun.
Yeah. So, and obviously you're familiar with the whole imposter syndrome, this imposter phenomenon. It's kind of that thing of where we fail to internalize our successes and we feel we're a fraud, although despite having success. So I'm curious if you've ever had a relationship with this phenomenon before.
Yeah, I did. We were married at one time, and we've since divorced, and it's more like a stalker ex. But it's so early on. I mean, I've kind of coached people my whole life without knowing I was coaching them, and that was always natural and fluid. And then I started studying and charging money, and that's when it showed up.
So what were you like saying to yourself when you started charging money? I'm curious.
Well, now I'm not just this guy that people relate to and connect to. Now I'm the expert. Now I'm presenting myself as the guy, and not necessarily even the best guy, but they're going to come and pay me money in a way that and money did have a big part of it, because just talking to people and helping them never did create this in me. It more came about for me in that journey of the exchange of something for that help.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I think that's like a big issue for a lot of people in, the healing services or providing their services. They're like, oh, I can offer my services like for free. But somehow we like don't want to value what we're doing and be like, oh no, we can charge for this. It's an interesting like disconnect for some reason.
It is. Yeah, it is. It is very, very common.
Yeah. So, did you know this phenomenon by name, or like were you kind of? Because it's like most people I talk to, they're like, "Oh, when they're explained what it is, they're like, oh, I think I have that." Even though I read basically that this is like a really prevalent thing, like 70% of the population has like at least one episode of this. So were you familiar with this? Like, did you know it by name, or you kind of just stumbled upon it and were like, oh yeah, I'm familiar with this?
I wasn't really familiar with it by name so much as just like a lot of other things in my journey of growth, I've discovered this thing inside of me, and then I found out it had a name. And that happens a lot, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if the name is necessarily important, but being able to recognize it and know that it is something that you do have to go through. It's not a switch that you turn on and off necessarily.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm curious, so when you just start realizing like, oh, okay, I'm having some issue that I might need to address at some point. Like, when did it become like, was it typically right when you were talking about money and thinking about money, or how did this all come about for you? And then to the point where you're like, now I'm researching this and like, oh, this is a thing that I need to work on.
Well, I think there are a number of training programs, both in the hypnosis field and the coaching field, that do bring this up. And I think that is important to make people aware that it's coming ahead of time. I ran into it and then ran into some training material that mentioned it, so I was already experiencing it. But I think it is beneficial if people can know, hey, this is something you're going to deal with. And if they can deal with that in the training ahead of time, it really can be helpful, I think. But no, when I went to I was doing some coaching ahead of time, and when I went to my first hypnosis training, I decided I was going to just completely go all out, and I booked 8 clients before I even went to my training.
Wow.
They were all ready for me when I got back. And then I'm like, oh crap, I really have to do this. And and there was a lot of weight to that
Mm,
with what I perceived other people's expectations would be. And often we do live in those world of other people's expectations. So so that weight, even though I created it myself, I felt like it was coming from around me. And that was part of the imposter syndrome, I think, was just that feeling, that weight of expectations and not knowing if I would measure up to
mm,
what I thought those expectations were.
mhm. And what do you feel like the other part of this equation was?
um, when
The
I
the
realized that I'm sorry,
Was it the money aspect, or was it?
money, definitely setting myself up as a professional that could charge decent money, even though at the beginning I didn't charge near what I charge now.
Mhm.
Um, but and then of course you do meet a lot of people in your profession when you do networking and things like that that are like, oh, I could never afford that. And then you start thinking, well, maybe I'm not helping people, maybe I should do this, maybe,
Yeah.
and when you're driven by that desire to truly help people, and I think most of us in this profession are, then money can be a stumbling block, and it can create this also this inner turmoil of conflict. Like, I'm not really in it for helping people, maybe I'm just in it for the money. No, I'm not in it for the money. What? And you go back and forth. None of that helps when you're already dealing with not feeling good enough,
Mm,
not feeling like you're the best to charge the level that you do, even though the people are getting great results and they're all very happy. It doesn't make it go away necessarily.
yeah, yeah. And I think and I know for me, because I openly admit that I've,
Mhm.
faced this issue as well. And we also discussed, like, does it ever really go away?
Mhm.
But for me also, it became like hypnosis can like help so many issues. And then
Mhm.
I was like, do I know enough? Like, I just had to keep studying because it just gets
Mhm.
an overwhelming amount of things that I can address. I'm like, I don't know if I could address all of them. And I think it's also
Mhm.
the illusion that it's like we're doing it. Like, because oftentimes we're just the guide, but we're leaving some open-ended,
Mhm.
we're allowing the client to ponder their own solutions. And sometimes like, oh, I forget
Mhm.
that, So it's like this
Yeah.
weird place.
Oh, I fully admit I've bought so many courses that I haven't even started, uh,
Yep.
thinking this could really help me, and this could really help me, and then you get distracted, and all of that really. And I think, like we talked earlier, imposter syndrome is a bit of a spectrum.
Mm,
It's not a switch that's on or off, and I think everybody has dealt with some aspect of it
mhm.
if they're in any kind of profession where they're exchanging money for a value.
Yeah.
Some people don't have very much, but I think it's there.
Mm,
Anyway, I think it's just really important that when you do and you're thinking about all these aspects of it, I think you just need to really get back to, hey, wait a minute. It's If you can be authentic, if you can realize it's not about you, I think that can really help you get out of that headspace.
yeah. And what I enjoy about this series, because a lot of people are bringing up authenticity. So what does that mean
Mhm.
to you, being authentic? Kind of.
Well, first of all, what is your whole reason? If you don't know your reason for doing what you're doing, then you're not going to be able to be authentic. For me, I love people. I love connecting with people. I love helping people. I love that and value that deep, deep inner connection where you know that there's going to be some change and shift to happen. Um, so authentic means if I can be able to be the real me, and if I can hold space for that client to be the real person that they are, and invite them into that space to where they can affect that change, I think the sky's the limit.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that you kind of mentioned this whole phenomenon is kind of like a spectrum. So can you like talk a little bit more about that? The spectrum of it.
Well, I mean, I joked earlier that we were married at one point. That would be higher on the spectrum, right? Um, and then as you go, you kind of like want to push it aside and say no, never, never again. But it's kind of like there stalking your Facebook and seeing what you're up to, and and so it really does. It really does. You can distance yourself from it. You can dissociate from it. You can overcome a lot of things, but you can never say, "I've got it made. I'm over it."
Mm,
There's always a little more inner work to do, because when you do that inner work and you do gain some ground in that, life will generally present you with more growth opportunities. and deeper connections with clients, and in ways that will challenge you in new ways. And then it's all over. Oh, wait a minute, that's even bigger, right? And so it creeps back up again. Nope, not today.
Yeah.
And there are ways to do that.
Yeah. You brought up something that was interesting. And I mentioned this before with another episode. There's this author named Judy Holler, and she has this book called Fear is My Homeboy. And she literally says,
yeah.
Imposter syndrome is leveling up. So you kind of
Mm-hmm.
mentioned that here, because you're like, oh, you get to a point and then you're growing, and then you're like, like something else. And that kind of like is life, right? Like how we evolve as people.
It is. So, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know how it came about for me. And you're right. I mean, it's a lot of it has to do with inner work, because there was a point when I was, I've been studying, I guess, for 5 years now at this point. And when I started it, I was like very gung-ho, like, yeah, like how you were in the training, like, yeah, let's do it. And then slowly over time, I was like, this is way more involved than I thought. This is a little more challenging than I thought. Like, oh my God. And then I started getting a lot of anxiety, placing a lot of the expectations on me, like placing the outcome on me. Like if they don't have a good outcome, it's reflecting about me and like what I'm doing. And then I was like, oh, there's so much to know, and I just don't know enough, and maybe I shouldn't do this at all. And I started having really, really, really bad anxiety to the point where it became a phobia. Like for a while, I was like, I'm not doing this at all. I'm just stopping. But then I kept, if you're passionate about something and you really want to help, and it kept drawing me back, and I'd be like, no, stop. Like, I just want to, there was a point where I just want to cut it off, because it's less pain that way, But you're right. Like a lot of inner work, a lot of getting to a point where, and I still feel it at times, but it presents itself in a different way. I don't have a phobic reaction to working with clients anymore, but I do. And that was the weird thing, because I was like, I'm having a phobic reaction to connecting with people, but I love connecting with people. Like, what is going on? Like, it was very weird for me.
Yeah.
So it was just like a assortment of things. I'm curious, do you work with clients that present this at all, and what are the kind of like the underlying factors, like, because obviously there's like fears here and stuff and anxiety
sure
So what do you think are like the underlying?
Well, I'm talking about fear. I did a little study with the Tony Robbins coaching group, and one of the things Tony talks about is there's usually two base fears. One is I won't be loved, and one is I'm not enough, right? And everything else can be built on top of those. And that one, that I am not enough, I think is the underlying fear of imposter syndrome. It does hit us in other areas besides this. I think we call it imposter syndrome when it's more in the professional realm like this. But it can be involved relationally as well, and affect us in lots of ways. So, and now I've completely forgotten what your question was, and now that I started down that path, but this is how it works, right?
Yeah, well, you mentioned like the underlying factors. So there's
yeah.
The fears.
Well, when you feel like you're not enough, your mind, your unconscious mind especially, will find all kinds of reasons to pop up ways that you want to get out of it. It will want you to push away, because it doesn't want to feel that. And when you don't want to feel that, you find ways to cope, whether it be anxiety as a coping mechanism for not wanting to feel the way you did with clients, or whether it be, I'll just write some things and I'll do an audio and people can listen to it instead of actually being face to face, and then I don't have to see them and I'll just sell it to them. People do have different ways of doing that, but I think that big base fear really is the key to all the other things that are underneath it. Anxiety is just a symptom of that, I believe.
Yeah, and it totally resonates, that fear of like, I'm just not enough, and you're right, because that is just not contextual. That could be in any area, relationships and with people, for sure. Have you noticed this with clients you work with as well? Kind of these.
They don't usually come in for that. It's more like things you start to notice because when you're starting to do work with a client, generally there's a layer or a veneer that once it's stripped away, other things start to bubble up. And so the clients I've worked with, generally, if we are dealing with something with imposter syndrome, there is generally a business context of some kind. I have a high-level business coach that I've worked with who had a lot of childhood trauma and things like that, and he was having trouble finishing his book, moving to that next level, all and charging, even though he's charging a lot of money, he was having trouble going and presenting himself in a way to bring those clients in. So we did some work, and yeah, the imposter syndrome was definitely there, and I don't think we ever had to really name it to work on it, but we got through, and yeah, his book's almost finished now, so
Nice. And I'm
I'm
curious,
looking forward to reading it.
yeah, that sounds awesome. And I'm curious how you helped him work through that a little bit. Like,
Well, we did a lot of things, and I'll be honest, I don't know if I remember everything we did. If I don't go to notes, people ask me sometimes, actually, right after the session, do you remember what you said in that part right there? And I'm like, I don't remember what I said right
I
there
did the same
because
thing.
I'm completely working unconsciously, right? But I do remember that we did a lot of timeline work, getting rid of a lot of the past things. We did some, I did Martin Castor Peterson's collapse stuff on him for some of that past work, dream self stuff. There was a lot of things that we flowed in and out of, and I don't remember them all, but all of it had to do with clearing and building.
Clearing and building.
And that's kind of the basic structure, no matter what technique you're using, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. And for yourself, when you started working through these, layers of issues for yourself regarding this, did you notice like any particular stumbling blocks along the way when you were trying to like sort this out for yourself?
Yeah. So for me, there were a couple things, and this is going to lead into my book recommendations, by the way. So
Nice.
one of them was a charging money thing, and I think a lot of us in the healing professions do have the money issue because we're not all that money driven. But you got to have money if you're going to have a business. So how do you get to that point? And I actually read a book called Tapping into Wealth by Margaret Lynch. I don't know if you've heard of it, but she goes through, and there's actually accompanying audios and videos you can go on YouTube and get that go with this book that lead you through all these kinds of EFT tapping processes to clear each and every layer of that's impeding you in that feeling worthy of money and getting money. There's all kinds of pieces, but going through that book, and I would actually recommend going through it occasionally, regularly.
Nice.
But it's really good to clear out those things, because sometimes when you clear them out, there are new ones that pop up.
Yeah.
But it was very helpful to me to be able to open myself up to believing that I could earn this kind of money, and I could be successful, and I deserved it.
Yeah. I mean, and like, as we know, like so much stems on our beliefs, right? Like we believe that to be reality. So we have a belief about money, that's like disempowering. Of course that's going to affect us. So it's like, yeah, so that's what I love about EFT for people who know. It's like that kind of various tapping points around the eye, or there's like the fast EFT. And it's kind of just like, I don't even know the correct terminology, but it sort of clears away the emotions related to like the belief systems or the memories ones have. So yeah, that's great. Those little psychosensory techniques.
Yeah, that one was a great book for helping me. And then the other one is, I don't know if you've heard of the book called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks.
Oh.
And he talks a lot about what we all have, this upper limit problem, and every one of us have it in every of our lives. And there are certain levels we get to in life, and then we keep bouncing off of it, right? We don't ever get above that certain level. And in fact, many times we'll even sabotage if we get up to that certain level. Until you address that upper limit problem, that's going to keep happening. And it can happen in finances and relationships and business. It can happen personally in so many ways. So I would find myself starting to do pretty well. I mean, I had a full-time job at the time while I was working, so I didn't need a lot of money. And then I would find a way to kind of like bounce off of that. So that book and some of the exercises in that, and I honestly don't remember every exercise in it, but I do remember going through that book and it really having an aha moment as to like, oh, I've been doing this my whole life, and I need to address that upper limit and not necessarily keep trying harder. I'm just going to try harder.
Right.
Because we do that, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So how did you start seeing the shifts in your own life when you had those aha and you were kind of surpassing that level, how did
I kind of created some I kind of merged some techniques together that made sense to me to start working on myself. But one of the biggest things I had to do was really get out of myself. When you have clients, you've got to completely come from a place of love and completely make it about them. So when you do that and you can truly get out of yourself, there's not anything left for imposter syndrome, not in that moment. Doesn't mean it won't come back. But in the moment, which is when you really need it, you can get out of yourself and be completely 100% working with that client. Completely motivated by that and nothing else, motivated by that love.
Yeah.
So that's, I think that was the first step for me. Now, everything that I did working was in the pursuit of that, because to me, that was the ideal. Yeah. And I also think that since things like imposter syndrome and things tend to get wired into our neurology, I think that the more you keep pushing them down in a way that's healthy and actually helps you overcome them, the more that you keep working on those issues, the less they come back, or the less powerfully they come back, or the less frequently they come back. Because your body knows how to respond when you start doing things to combat that.
Agreed. And like that expression, what you resist persists. So at least for me, if I were trying to just like to push it away and not address it, then it came back harder and stronger. So yeah, if you're continually working on that or working on your issues, I mean, eventually, you kind of pull back the layers to those emotions and those, like I always say, like things like this are like an onion, our emotions are like an onion. So just keep pulling back the layers to like.
And sometimes when you pull a layer off, it makes you cry.
Yes, many layers, and you just keep crying for a while. And what I like about what you said, because kind of stepping outside of yourself, it kind of goes with everything. Like not even people who are just, working with clients or serving. Like even if you're, in a corporate world and you're, having a hard time with your boss or something, you kind of just step outside of yourself and kind of be the objective observer to what's happening. You kind of do have a different perspective on things. So how do you start doing that for someone? And if you want to give, if you really want to talk to those people out there who have this, feel trapped by it, right? They feel kind of a little debilitated. How can you start helping them see that and feel differently about it? How can they start getting into that really objective?
Well, obviously, I mean, each person is a little bit different, but I can go through a little bit of what I do, and maybe that will help some people. One of the things I do is try to promote some kinds of positive affirmations that are built in. I studied some with Mike Mandel in Toronto. One of the things he talks about is a tapping thing. And there's a spot on your hand called the triple warmer spot. I don't know if you know where it's at, right between those two fingers, down in this channel, right in here. And if you'll tap that spot while giving your positive affirmations, it's kind of the opposite of the other tapping that clears things. This actually helps to install them.
Yeah, he calls it like steps into your ego state, right?
You can say, I am powerful, I am enough, I am knowledgeable, whatever those things are that you're lacking, that you feel like you want. And it's not necessarily that you're lacking them. It's just that you don't feel like you have them, but it's actually there. We have these things called mirror neurons. And I know from research that if we recognize a great trait in someone else, that those mirror neurons have recognized it as something that's in us. So the fact that we can recognize it in someone means it is in us, maybe untapped, but it's there. So good news for you people that only see the good in the world, because people call you naive, but there's really a lot of good in that. But if you'll use that, and if you can recognize those things, it is in there. And this just helps bring it into the, as you said, the directive ego state, the executive.
So how does this work again? I'm sorry. I'm like,
so you just tap, I'm holding it up like this because that's how the camera can see it. But it sure is easier if you have it like this, or even if it's sitting somewhere. But yeah, just tap it. I'll use 2 or 3 fingers.
Yeah, it's interesting because it actually does make you like me feel differently, like internally. Yeah. Why is that?
But if you're saying something positive in the meantime, it does help to install those things. Obviously, it's not a one-shot solution.
Did you say it's connected to like what in our body?
In Chinese, the medicine is called the triple warmer.
Okay, that's what I thought.
If you get much beyond that, I'm a practical, hey, this really works guy.
Yeah.
And some of these things like tapping, I couldn't give you an exact explanation for every bit of how it works.
I think that
But
actually,
hey, I used it with.
yeah. No, it makes sense because I think that dissipates like emotion in the body. The triple warmer. I think that's like,
Yeah.
that's
But
awesome.
you can install some really positive things with that. And then the other thing I do, I kind of stole some different techniques from different people and used pieces that work together. That's all hypnosis, right?
Yeah.
I
love it.
So in and what probably wasn't original with her, but in one of Jess Marion's books, actually I think it's her smoking cessation book, they talk about creating space for the client. And they do it by I think Carlos Castaneda called it stopping the world, that technique where you just elevate your eyes a little bit and just focus on a spot, but do it with the intention of creating space. When you create that space and then you start doing a few of these other things, it'll connect you to the client in a way that you just can't have that imposter syndrome up in your head. So I would do that. And then I would do something that was similar to Steve Andreas' core transformation. So I would start at the top of where I was feeling that imposter syndrome while I was creating this space, and I would work my way down to the layer of complete love and complete space for the client. And I would keep pulling that up through all the layers. Have you ever done that? That core transformation stuff?
I
So
mean,
you kind of get what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So I think
now this is all client-centered, not just me-centered. And you pull that up to have it eventually cover that whole imposter syndrome layer. And eventually you can kind of do it really quickly. But at first it's like, oh, let's drag these layers up because, they don't want to budge.
Yeah. So interesting. So I believe I learned it from Alyssa Tears. I think she calls it different. She calls it like an emotive journey. So if you're feeling a certain way, right? Like just saying you're feeling like crappy, like you're thinking like, oh my God, I'm a fraud, right?
Sure.
And you're feeling that, right? And then you kind of, it's essentially feeling emotion only so much you can drop down to the layer below it, right?
Right. So it's very similar to that.
Right? And covering all the emotions until you
reach that good one.
Yeah.
But instead of being undirected like hers is, you're actually looking for that place of complete connection and it all being about the client. Because there's a very specific purpose for this, not just not feeling that, but how am I going to transform this in a way that empowers me with that client? It's not just about me feeling better.
Yeah.
Right?
So how do you connect the two?
That's a great part of it.
Right. I'm sorry. So how do you connect the two? If that makes sense.
The eye roll thing?
Okay. And we're doing like an ego state, right? We're kind of, stepping.
That one is about me. Yeah. That one is about me. That one is about installing the positive beliefs and changes, right?
Okay.
So that one is me-centered. That one, they're actually separate, but I use them both.
Yeah, and I like it because I feel like, you can do them all together. So
no, but then the other one with the eye roll, creating space, and the eye roll creates a little light trance also, which can help you dig through those layers. It doesn't take much trance, right?
Yeah, so you're picking a point, right?
Picking a point, finding that spot, just letting your vision soften just enough that you can clear out your mind, because we have that monkey mind that's going all the time.
So seeing the space and maybe around it.
Yeah. Right. And making that space about the client, because you're getting out of yourself, right? That space is the space the client can inhabit. And it's actually really powerful. You do it right before the client comes in. They're going to sense that. They may not have words for it, but they're going to sense that space is all about them.
So is it sort of like envisioning the client in a space with you? Is that sort of like how you do it, or how do you do that?
I don't do it visually so much as intentionally, like a heart thing, like an opening up. Yeah.
Oh, I like that.
And then as I'm in that space is when I start dropping down through those layers and pulling up that core part of me that is all about the client, all about love. And it helps to transform any issues in the way.
So can you show me a little bit of how you do that with dropping down and while it's being all about love? So how would you, what would you say to yourself, or how would you experience that? I just want to get an idea for people.
You might start at this top layer, and this top layer is your imposter syndrome. And it doesn't matter, but it's good to give things a name just so that you a point of reference, right? And then you say, okay, what does that layer look like? What does it feel like? And so it can be, let's say it's black and it's bumpy, right?
Yeah.
And then say, and just feel like you're floating, you're falling down through that, like you're going down through a cloud, down to a layer below it. What is below that? And for me, it might be uncertainty, let's say. And then, oh, that uncertainty, what is that? How does that feel? What does that look like? And uncertainty might be pink and I don't know, because I'm not in it right now, but it might be pink and kind of swirly, whatever that happens to be. And then you come down. Okay, so if you fall down through that layer, just let yourself float down to that very next layer. What is underneath that uncertainty? And it might be not enough. That might be the one. That might be the one you really have to get through, right?
Yeah.
And uncertainty is this crazy stormy looking gray, and it's like swirling like a tornado or something. I mean, it can be anything, right? And then finally, maybe you drop down below that layer and you come to this layer of that you're looking for. And so there is intention there. And it could be complete, unconditional love for the client in that space that you created for them. And that might be yellow, and it might be a field of flowers. And if it's something like that, you might even think, oh, I could smell that. What does that smell like, right? Any senses you can add to it or help, especially on that bottom layer, because that's going to have to carry all the way back up. Those flowers are going to have to grow all the way through those layers. And then you just grab it, and sometimes it's really easy to come up to the next layer with it and like start to cover it over. Every once in a while, you're like, it feels like you're bumping through, because some things internally they're a little resistant. Yeah. And so. But it is, the more you work on it, the easier it gets. I mean, for me, it's really easy now, really fast, but not at first. Yeah. It took some time.
I love that, because you combine the literal, like with the word, like an emotion, like an uncertainty or not enough, also, and combined it with the metaphors and the symbols of the unconscious mind, and you're like playing with both of them. So I like that a lot, as opposed to just using the emotion, because then you can play with the symbols. Like you said, the flowers are growing up through the other. So I like that.
And sometimes if you've done it for a while, and let's say this, like sunflowers are your regular symbol of that layer. Sometimes you can just think sunflowers and it puts you right there. After you've done it for a while, it's like it gets anchored in a way that's positive.
I love that, Mark. That was really good. I really like that a lot, and I'm totally going to be using that, like all of it.
Good. Good.
Excellent. So
good. I stole most of it.
Yeah, and I'm familiar with that, like the methods that you used, but I like how you use it in a different way, and in a creative way with regards to this, situation. So that's the fun of it. We kind of all change it up to suit our needs and to suit our clients' needs and stuff like that. So that's perfect. So is there anything else you want to say to those people who might be, facing this, or?
First, you have to realize that this is absolutely normal. We don't talk about it a lot because no one wants to be out there like, I feel like a fraud, except to maybe their very closest friends. But when we start talking about it, like we are here, people can at first feel like they're not alone. Like, oh, this is actually normal to go through this. And people have actually gotten past this. And here's some ways we can do that. So all I want to do is make people feel empowered, which is what I do in my practice anyway. I want you to feel empowered that you can affect the change you want in your life. And there are ways to do it. And if you really have trouble on your own, there are people that can help you with that. But for a lot of you, especially those of you that are trained out there, a lot of you can handle this. And you don't have to overcomplicate it, because we do that a lot too.
Yeah, love that. Mark, where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you, learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, on my Facebook page, Mark Sewell Hypnotist is a great way to start. I get a lot of messages from there. I mean, if you're in the area of Springfield especially, you can Google my business and I'll show up on the maps and directly to me that way. You can email me, mark@marksewell.com. I'm sure she can post a link in the notes there. And eventually, the website's there, marksewell.com. You can go there. you can look things. It will be definitely a work in progress. I tend to focus a lot of my energy on clients and not a lot of it on the back details. And so I need to get some people. Maybe you have people you can connect me to.
I hear that. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
issue that a lot of us have.
And I do work virtually, so I can work anywhere in the world. I currently have clients, Toronto and New Jersey and Texas. I've had clients in the UK. So there's not really a limit unless there's a time constraint between the two of us in that way. So, I mean, I do like working one-on-one in my office. Don't get me wrong. That's the most fun.
Yeah.
But you can work anywhere in the world. Modern technology is amazing.
It is. It is. This is how we're doing this now.
Exactly.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for being on my show. I hope you had a good time.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it very much.
Till next time, folks, just remember, you are worth it. Thank you for watching this episode of Worth It. And if you're wondering where you can learn more about me, well, I'm a hypnotist, NLP practitioner, and energy healer based in Hollywood, California. You can book a session with me at the shop I work at by going to liberatehollywood.com. But if you're out of the state, I do work through Zoom. And you can find more about me on my website, LonnieBuess.com. That's LANIBUESS.com. Feel free to email me at change@LonnieBuess.com or find me on Facebook at Coach Lonnie B or Instagram at Lonnie_B_change. And check out my YouTube channel, Lonnie Buess, where you'll find a bunch of videos to watch. And if you want to join the Facebook group for this very show, go to facebook.com/groups/worthitshow. Thanks again for watching this episode. Feel free to email me to give me feedback on how you're loving it. And again, just remember, you're worth it. Until next time.